Welcome everyone to Food Preservation Tips and Tricks for a Zero Waste Kitchen. This is the third webinar in a series being put on by Sustainable Resilient Longmont's Zero Waste Committee. Sustainable Resilient Longmont is a nonprofit organization that collaborates with the Longmont community to cultivate a sustainable and thriving city through education, advocacy, and action. We have three main programs of focus. We put on the annual Longmont Earth Day celebration. We work to achieve 100% renewable energy by 2030 for the city of Longmont. And we advocate for the Longmont community to move towards becoming zero waste. My name is Naomi Curland, and I'm the chair of the Zero Waste Committee for SRL, as well as the executive director of Longmont Food Rescue. I have been interested in preserving food for as long as I've been involved in food rescue work, and I ran a produce exchange in Los Angeles for 9 years, where I learned about canning, drying, and other food preservation techniques to help process and save excess food from local growers. I'm joined today by two other members of the SRL Zero Waste Committee, Jenny Kim and Jasmine Walker. Jenny, you may remember from last month's webinar, Living a Zero Waste Lifestyle in the Time of COVID. She is a physician who is passionate about both food and health and how they interconnect. She believes that the process of preparing homemade food with fresh ingredients, like she ate growing up, contributes to emotional and physical well-being. Jasmine started changing her habits around waste after traveling abroad and seeing the impact that waste has had on the natural world. She found she could make a big difference with her choices, especially when it came to the kitchen. She considers herself to be a reducitarian, trying to find balance in all things food related. Nothing is strictly excluded, but she tries to reduce items that produce waste, like animal-based products and those which send trash to the landfill. Our goal is to make this easy and accessible for people who haven't tried these techniques before and are looking for ways to reduce kitchen waste and preserve their harvests or a bountiful farmers market spree. Compared to our previous webinars, this one will be fewer informational slides and more practical in the kitchen examples. So with that in mind, we thought we'd begin with some short kitchen tours to share our favorite zero waste kitchen tools and setup. Jasmine, would you like to start?
Sure thing. Thanks, Naomi, for the great introduction. So like Naomi said, I practice zero waste in my kitchen as much as I can. And I wanted to give you a quick little tour of my cupboards and then talk about some of the tools that I use in my kitchen regularly to help with my zero waste kitchen lifestyle. So apologies for a shaky camera for a moment here, but wanted to show you my actual cupboard. So how do I flip my camera? Here we go. All right, so you can see here, this is kind of my main pantry here. And on the right, you see a ton of stuff in jars and bags and things like that, which I refill at the bulk store here in Longmont, Simply Bulk, which I absolutely love. But you can also find bulk sections at just your normal grocery stores, Whole Foods, King Soopers, all of those have bulk sections. And I would encourage you to have a conversation with the employees there about bringing in your own containers and refilling them. It's really a great way to reduce waste. But I also wanted to show you the left side of my pantry because it is not super zero waste. And I think it's important to stress that you don't have to be perfect with your zero waste kitchen habits in order to make a difference. So one quote that I've read, which I think is really powerful, is about how we don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions of people doing zero waste imperfectly. So keep your crunchy chips if you have to have them like I do, but do whatever you can to buy things in bulk and use things that way. I also wanted to show you my spice drawer down here, which is also very much bulk refills. These little mason jars are super handy for little spices. You can even buy lids that have shakers in them, so you don't have to have just like a jar of spice. You can shake them out like you might be used to. So yeah, that's a little bit of my own kitchen. And I wanted to show you also one thing that's important, I think, is about how you store your food. So in order to make things stay fresher longer, storing them is really important. So I have a 2-tiered fruit basket that I use. And I don't have any apples right now, but I wanted to point out things like keeping your bananas and your apples separate helps to preserve their shelf life. So that's really important. There's also potatoes and onions. I have a little bin over here where I keep those separate as well, because when you have them together, the onions emit gases that will ripen the potatoes and cause them to have eyes, and it just gets yucky. So that's another thing. And then one other little thing, you can see these little tomatoes here. Just wanted to say that, you know, things are good on the countertop. Sorry, I'm gonna switch back my camera. Tomatoes, for example, you don't need to keep those in the fridge. In fact, they get really mealy if you keep them in the fridge. So just something to think about. Unless they're about to expire and go bad, then keep them on the counter. They'll taste a lot better. So quickly, I also wanted to show you some tools that I use for my zero waste kitchen. One of them is this hand blender, also known as an immersion blender, or a couple different names, but it's really great for making soups and dips and all kinds of things. So that's a good one. I also have a sieve, a really fine mesh sieve that I use for lots of things, just straining, and I can't even think a million things, including broth and yogurts and cheese. So that's really great. Also a funnel. This is only a small one, but for refilling containers, a funnel is a really, really great tool to have as well. And then one other thing that I wanted to point out was a scale. So I use this kitchen scale. I think it's more of a coffee scale really, but I use it for everything because I think portion control is another really good way to control your waste. A lot of times we cook too much. And so having a scale or having another way of measuring out what you're going to be cooking and what you actually need to eat is really important as well. I think that's it from me. Yeah, that's all.
Great, thank you so much, Jasmine. I love your potato and onion bin. That's really cool. I'd not seen that before, so I really love that. Jenny, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. We love to cook in our house, and because we love it so much, is the voice not coming through? Okay. Because we love to cook so much, we've got things sprawled out from the kitchen to the dining room, and I'll show you some of the things that we've got. Also got to turn the camera around. Okay, we'll start in the pantry, and you know, the pantry's been set up to have a lot of containers so we can see where everything is. And this bin over here is one that I use for plastic bags because it's inevitable in our house that we have them, and I want to use them before I either throw them away or recycle them. And sometimes it's been such a pain to wash the bags, and I just discovered that if I put it down here, just lay it on top of the vinegar bottle, then it's much easier than making a mess on the kitchen drying rack. These are some jars that I've either upcycled, plastic jars or mason jars that hold bulk items, and I try to save any containers that might be useful to refill in the future. So it's definitely work in progress, finding what we can buy in bulk and what we have to use plastic for. So the next stop here is in these higher cabinets, and I just wanted to show that the Lazy Susan is a great way to make spice bottles accessible. So I've got Lazy Susans everywhere so that I can collect items that I use to make different types of foods and homemade products. Okay. Next up is this drawer full of glass containers, and these are great for storing your leftovers, and if they have the snap lids, then they also freeze very well. but an abundance of containers is essential to cook a lot and reduce waste. And here's just another area where we've done that. So look around your home and see what products you use and how you can organize things. It's always work in progress and it's never perfect, but it's such a joyful and fun process. These are some things that we've leveled up on. So these are gadgets that you may or may not have, and I'll tell you why I've found some of them useful. This is just a French press coffee maker. So instead of having throwaway filters, coffee filters, or the one-time use coffee containers, just boil water in the kettle and make coffee in here, and it's no waste. This is a food processor, which I'll show you later on. My husband also uses it for making doughs and bread making, and then we'll store our breads up here once they're made. This is an Instant Pot, and Instant Pots, I'm sorry, this is not an Instant Pot, this is an air fryer. And you know, I thought I was getting an air fryer to replace deep frying, but it actually doesn't serve that purpose for me. What I love it for is making toast or garlic bread, but most of all for making vegetables. It just makes vegetables, whether they're fresh or frozen, taste delicious, and it makes it really easy to make a second side dish with it. And here's the Instant Pot. I'll have a couple of recipes linked to it later. We use it a lot for rice, and also I've just got some beans in there right now because my son will eat them for lunch, and then you can use beans, dried beans instead of canned beans for any recipes. And finally, here's a soda stream in case you want to make your own soda at home instead of buying cans. All right, thanks for listening.
Great, thank you, Jenny. So you both covered most of my favorite tools already, but I've got a couple. I've got a soda stream back behind me on that side, Instant Pot on that side. But you know, a lot of those, they're a little expensive, like in big blenders, food processors. You can find them secondhand. You can find them on Craigslist. So I would recommend, if you don't have those and you would like to purchase them, to look for secondhand first. I also really like, takes up less counter space, one of the little micro blenders. This one's a Magic Bullet. Again, you can find it secondhand. This is kind of the maximum capacity for it, so it's for small things, but it's good for sauces, purees, spices, making pastes. So it's nice to have a very powerful micro blender that doesn't take up space and can help process food quickly, and has a lot of strength behind its motor. Cheesecloth is one of my favorite things. This is a biodegradable one. So this is certified organic unbleached cheesecloth, which means I can put it into my compost bin. So I've got my little compost bin here. Usually I keep this in the fridge just so it stays and doesn't stink up, and then bring it out to the compost. But I like having a little portable one with a lid like this. Makes it really convenient and not smell too bad. Another thing I really love for a zero waste kitchen is Beeswrap. So instead of using plastic wrap, this is coated fabric coated in beeswax. It smells great and it's reusable. You can wash it, you can mold it, yeah, I've got it in a bunch of different sizes. It came in a multi-pack, but you don't need plastic wrap to have really nice preserved small items. You know, like if you've got a cut piece of fruit that you want to not put into its own container and oxidize, you can wrap this tightly around it. Works really, really well. I think that's about it for my tools, because like I said, I have a lot of the same stuff that was already shared. So let's get started on our zero waste kitchen techniques. I'm going to begin with herbs. So herbs are often sold in larger bunches than what you need for a single recipe. And for storing herbs, for them to last as long as possible, you don't want to store them in whatever container you brought them back from the store in, whatever bag or whatnot. You store them just like fresh cut flowers. So you trim off the bottoms, get a little vase or a jar, put them in here. This was a bunch of basil I got a week and a half ago, I think, and there's still some sprigs that I had left that are pretty good. I've also got some dill heads in there from when I was pickling, didn't use them all. And a really nice thing about basil too, if I'll pull this up, it'll grow its own roots. So these have already sprouted some roots after a week and a half. And if I wanted to, I could plant these in my yard or in a pot and regrow a new plant. I might do that with one of these. So you can regrow a lot of vegetables from scratch. That's one of my favorite zero waste tricks to do. Right now I'm regrowing some leeks over here. I've got them on my windowsill so they get some sun. I had bought these earlier this week and maybe on this weekend had cut off the bottoms, put them in some water, and they've already grown some roots and some shoots. And so when these shoots get to about here, I can start trimming them and using them for recipes, or I could plant them. And I've planted a handful out in my yard, sometimes in pots, and they'll regrow. Keep cutting them, keep using them. You want to, when you trim them and put water in there, you want them to be upright. So these ones happen to all fit and stay level, but if they don't, you can use toothpicks to prop them up, keep them level. And you always want the water level to be just below where you cut them, because this part needs to harden, needs to dry out so it can start growing new growth and not get moldy. And then I change out the water about once a day. So whatever's in here will start getting a little stinky. So it smells like leeks. You drain it out, add more. Yeah, a couple of weeks, these will be ready to use again. So that's one of my favorites to do. You can do that with celery, same thing, just cutting off the celery, putting it in water, it'll grow roots and new celery plant. You can do it with lettuce that way, get new leaves coming out. You can do that actually with lettuce in your garden too. If you grow outside, you can cut off the top and new shoots will come out of that. Beet greens, you can cut off the tops of beets and trim the beet greens, and then you'll keep getting new greens to cook with. It won't grow a whole new beet, but it'll grow greens for you to grow. And I use those in stir fries and stuff. Green onions work that way. Garlic, garlic cloves that start to sprout, they'll start to grow roots, and you can get some garlic scapes, the chive-y sort of garlic greens that grow out of the top. And potatoes too. You can regrow those. You don't put in water though. When your potato starts getting eyes, if you did store your potatoes with onions or something else and it started to get eyes and they started getting sprouts and past the point of being able to eat them, you cut them into little chunks. And I just did this past spring with a couple potatoes that sprouted. And you have to leave them out overnight or out for like 2 days until the cut edge hardens off. And you can cut them so that there's one sprout per chunk. And then each of those chunks, once the bottom has dried out and hardened, so it won't get moldy when you plant it, you can dig a little trough. I did one right along my fence in a little plot of land I had. So I dug out, planted them in, and then I've been eating potatoes now. This month they're in season, and out of like 2 bad potatoes, I've gotten a couple dozen already. So that's like a really wonderful way to not let any food scraps go to waste and get new food in return. So I really love growing from food scraps when I can. So another technique that you can use to preserve food, drying. I like to dry my herbs hanging upside down like this. So I'll use the ones I've been drying this week. I'll bring them over. Here. Some oregano from my garden. I put it out probably 5 or 6 days ago, and it's definitely done. I just kept it hanging up for showing off to you, but it's ready to be crumbled up or put into a airtight container and used in recipes. This is a little Thai basil that I gotten with my other basil, and it was starting to get a little wrinkly, so I hung it up the other day, and it's probably needs 1 more day of drying. But then I can like sprinkle it on any sort of dish I want, probably my fried rice later this week. So you can also dry herbs in oven or in microwave. There's recipes for doing that. You need to do it all at a very low temperature though. You don't want it to burn, and you have to be very mindful, keeping an eye on it. So I really like doing the hang dried herbs here. We have a really dry air in Colorado, which is great for drying herbs. So it goes quickly. And I think they're really pretty when you make the little satchels and tie them up. I like having them hanging in the window. So another thing that I dried this past week was tomatoes. So we have a climate where we can do sun-dried tomatoes if the weather is hot enough. So if it's close to 100 degrees, which this summer we had a little run of temperature that was close to 100. If you have a couple days in a row like that, you can lay them out, and you want to get screens or grates that you cover in the cheesecloth and lay out the sliced tomatoes. And it helps if you're doing especially sun-dried to put them over a tray that you cover in tin foil. It helps reflect the sun, trap in the heat, and you want them propped up so that there's airflow that gets on both sides. And then about halfway through the first day, you'll flip them over so they get similar sun and air on both sides. At night, you have to take them in, and then the next day you bring them out again. If you leave them overnight, they can collect and they can get wet again. You want to get them as dry as possible if you're sun drying. So I started mine this week on the hottest day, and then I saw the forecast and it wasn't going to be hot many days in a row. So I decided to finish them off in the oven. If you do the sun dry technique totally though, just be mindful you can have pests and wind. So you be careful where you place them and know if it's going to be a high wind day. And also after you've brought them in, they're fully leathery and dried. You're going to want to make sure there's no bacteria, nothing that got on them in the air dry process. So you freeze for at least 2 days after that to kill anything off, or you can heat them at 175 in an oven for 5 to 10 minutes. So there's extra steps involved with sun-dried. It's a really romantic technique to use, but I do prefer using the oven because it's a little more convenient, a little bit faster. So it's still a few hours, anywhere from like 6 to 8 hours, but on the lowest setting you can put your oven on. You prepare the sheets exactly the same way with grate or something covered in the cheesecloth to lift it up so that there's airflow, and then you check on them once an hour. So it's recommended if you can get your oven to 145, 155, that's great. But mine only goes down to 170. So that's what I did it at. And I just have to check a little more often. You check hourly, you flip them and rotate them every 2 hours. And then once they start being either leathery or crispy, you know, if you crisp them, then they're a little bit more crumbly, they're ready to go. You have to let them cool completely before you store them. So you let them cool off on the counter. And I had some that were a little bit more crispy, so I put them just straight into a jar. I made sure that they're completely dry, and they crumble really well this way. So I crumbled them into salads, into rice dishes, into eggs. And so these are easy to store once they're fully dry. The ones that were a little bit more leathery, like what you might think of as a classic sun-dried tomato texture, I packed in oil. So I don't know if you can see, but basically you can pack tomato in oil, but it's recommended that you first make sure it's totally dry, got as dry as possible, and then dip it into vinegar. And the vinegar raises the acidity slightly, so if there is anything potentially remaining, having that higher level of acidity will help, you know, not propagate botulism. So dip in vinegar and then pack in, and then pour hot oil on top. If you're gonna want this to be shelf stable, you don't wanna put any fresh garlic or fresh herbs in here. If you're gonna put it straight in the fridge, you can put fresh garlic, fresh herbs, whatever, and it can stay in the fridge. But if you want it to be on the counter in the cupboard, dry herbs only, because again, you just don't want to introduce any more moisture into it, and that will keep it safe. And of course, if you have a dehydrator, that's great. You can do it for fruits and vegetables and all sorts of things. But like I said at the beginning of this webinar, I really want to keep this as easy to access techniques as possible. And a lot of people don't have dehydrators, so you can definitely do it in oven. You can experiment with sun drying. But I think oven drying is a pretty good technique if you don't mind having the oven on for a few hours and checking it every hour. Yeah, and I love sun-dried tomatoes and oven-dried tomatoes, so I recommend trying it out. Especially since it's tomato season. So that's it for drying for now. Next up, Jasmine and Jenny are going to talk about one of their favorite preserving techniques, which is freezing. Jasmine.
Hello again. Yeah, so freezing is one of my favorite preserving techniques. It doesn't require a whole lot of skill or time or fancy equipment or anything like that. And so it is one of my favorite things to do. And I have a little demo. I'm going to show you how to blanch vegetables. Not all veggies are good for blanching, but a lot of things are. Leafy greens are really, really great. I'm pretty sure you could even do squash and all kinds of things. One thing to say too is that Google is my best friend. So if ever I don't know if a certain veggie can like be blanched or be frozen just as is, just Google it. That's really where I've learned most of the things that I do. So let me flip my camera again. I'm going to show you how to blanch some spinach, and then we'll talk about some fruit freezing as well. So flip. Okay. So I've got going here a pot of boiling water. The idea behind blanching is that what you're doing is you're bringing the vegetables up to like their best state, I guess. So you're only really going to put something in the boiling water for like 2 minutes, 1 to 2 minutes, and then you're very quickly going to put it into ice water and cool it down so that it preserves its crispness and it stays really good. So here is a little bowl of spinach. Boiling might not be the best way for spinach. Steaming might be better, but for me, like I said, I just keep things as simple as possible. So I just threw in a tiny bit of spinach there. We'll let that sit for a couple minutes, and then I'll show you guys about plunging it in the ice water and then freezing it. But while that's doing its thing for a couple minutes, I wanted to talk about fruit. So going over to my freezer, I'm gonna pull out this tray here. So fruit is a hard one to freeze because it can be really squishy. So if you have things that are really squishy, the best thing you can do is freeze them in small pieces. So, and later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about a few recipes that use things like this. But you can see here, where's my shadow, is pretty bad, but I have little pieces of banana that have been frozen. And when they're like this, and little strawberries, when they're like this, you can put them, what you do is you put them into bite-sized pieces or whatever size chunks you want. You throw them in the freezer on a tray like this. I also forgot to mention earlier about reusable parchment paper, one of my favorite things to use pretty much daily. But you throw it into the freezer for a couple of hours or overnight if you have the time. And then when the couple hours or whatever time has passed, you can take all these little pieces and store them in one container. So I actually have, sorry again for the seasickness probably, but I've got a little container here of bananas that I froze earlier today in individual pieces. And you can see that they stay really nice and individual, even once they're frozen. If you think about just putting fresh banana into a freezer, into a container like that to freeze, it's not gonna work really well. It's just gonna be one big ball of mush. And then when it comes time to make smoothies and things like that, it's gonna be really hard to get the pieces that you want and the portions that you want. Okay, going back over to the spinach, it's been more than a couple minutes, but that's okay. So it's in here, it's nice and green. The water's pretty green too, which is not ideal, but that's okay. What you do is you just take it and you plunge it straight into a bath of ice water. So this cools it down almost immediately. You can use your hands if you want to get in there, or you can use a pair of tongs. But what you can do when you have things like this, when you have little green blanched greens, you can do the same thing that you did with the fruit. You can make little piles of the greens. This is not the prettiest of demos, but you can make little piles of the greens. You can use an ice cube tray and put things in there. And then when you're ready, you can just pick up those little pieces that you want. You can store them all in the same little container, and then you can throw them in things like smoothies, soups, whatever you've got. So it's a really great thing to use for, it's a really great technique to use for preserving things that are gonna go bad. I like to use it a lot. One other thing to mention is about freezing bread. So my husband works at a bakery and it's just the two of us, so we don't go through much bread. And I think this is, you know, might be kind of basic, but I really do freeze every loaf of bread that we get. So as soon as it comes home, as long as it's not still warm, I will slice the bread into whatever slice sizes I want, and then put it in a plastic bag and freeze for later. I don't know if you can see, but you can see all the individual pieces here. And you can see that there's some frozen icy stuff on there. But the best thing to do when you have bread frozen is to take it out piece by piece. It's the same idea as the fruit. When you have piece by piece, it's easy to take one piece out. And then you can toast it, or not. You can just let it sit out and thaw. But I like to toast it. And it's totally fine. I can't tell you how long they last because we do still eat it fairly quickly. But freezing bread is a great way to use it. And also things like bagels and other baked goods can be frozen. And I use the same plastic bag pretty much over and over until it gets real bad. So, so I would encourage you to do the same thing. I think the last thing I'm going to talk about is making broth and freezing in glass containers. So this little bag that I have here is a bag of veggie scraps, and it's really not pretty, but again, it's just scraps. So you can make broth by saving your vegetable scraps, but not all of them. You don't want to save something that's bitter, like cauliflower or broccoli. You can use pretty much all the parts of those veggies. But things like onion skins are really great. Carrots, the tops of them, when you've cut those off and you're using the rest of the carrot. What else do I have here? Sometimes I'll even put little bits of garlic and things like that. Again, if you don't know if it's going to be good in broth, Google it. It'll tell you everything you need to know. And when it comes time to making broth, I take these veggie scraps when the bag gets pretty full. And I also, sometimes if I have like a rotisserie chicken and I've saved the bones and skin and different parts of the chicken, I'll throw that in to make broth as well. So I thought I would just show really quickly a very informal presentation of the photo process of making broth. So this is the first thing I do to make broth is I put all those veggie scraps and any bones that I have into a big pot and cover it with water. I add a bunch of savory herbs and whatever sounds good for broth. Again, Google's a good friend to figure out what might be good, but I usually use sage. I put in peppercorns. Thyme is good, rosemary is good, definitely salt. You'll want to put in some salt to bring up the flavors. And then you bring it to a boil. So this is it when it's just about boiling. I usually cover it and turn it down to a simmer. Again, this might sound really basic, but doing things like covering your pot saves energy, and it helps to not evaporate all the liquid that you have in your pot. So I leave a little gap over here just to let some of the steam out, but I let it sit there for a couple hours simmering, or as long as you're able to leave it, maybe not a week, but for a little while, just to let it, all the flavors get really nice and delicious. You can taste it as you go, see how it is. If it needs to sit for longer, definitely let it sit for longer. And then I talked about my sieve earlier. This is definitely an application where I use it a ton, as well as a little Pyrex dish underneath. I will just use my tongs and I'll pull out the chunks of veggies, let them strain off into that Pyrex dish underneath. And then when I have enough liquid, I will pour it into my large mason jars or ball jars or whatever you want to call them. I do freeze these glass jars and I have had many mishaps. So I wanted to give you guys some tips about how to freeze well in glass. One of the things that I would strongly suggest is not filling the liquid all the way to the top. What that does is, well, as we all know, water is a weird substance, weird liquid, and it expands when it freezes, just like your ice cubes, you know, take up more space than just your water. And so if you don't leave some room for it to expand, the glass jars will break. Another thing I do is I don't screw the lids on fully right away, because the liquid is usually pretty hot when you pour it in there and you need some of that room to let the steam escape. And then I let them cool down for a little while on my countertop before I put them in the fridge with the lid still a little bit loose. I let the broth get down to fridge temperature, and then I put them into the freezer. So it's a little bit of a process, but again, it just takes you like 2 minutes, go in the kitchen, do the next thing, leave for a while, come back, do the next thing, leave again. And that's basically it. Like I said, have had things break. It's not going to be perfect, but as long as you're using tempered glass, which many of those jars that we see they're tempered glass, and even just your normal everyday Tupperwares and things like that are tempered glass, you should be fine. So I think that's it from me for right now.
Great, thank you so much, Jasmine. Jenny, are you ready to share?
Yes, we are here. I'm going to hand the camera over and our first station is going to be here with the food processor. So I love making flavorful food. We love flavor in our house. I'm from an Indian background and my husband's from a Korean background, and we use a lot of garlic. Italians use a lot of garlic. All good recipes use garlic. So one thing that makes it really easy for us to use is to make a paste out of it. And here's a bunch of garlic that if I have time, I can sit down and just peel garlic and make a meditation out of it. But there are times in my life that I've just been too busy, and you could just start with peeled garlic that you buy at the store. And what we do is, since I have a food processor, I'll just put the peeled garlic with some salt and oil in here and blend it right up to make a paste, and fill up a usually small size, but sometimes I'll just have one large size to put in the refrigerator. Fill up these jars with paste, and it just makes it very easy to add garlic to any recipe that you're making. You could brush it on toast and make garlic toast. And all these recipes that I'm talking about, we do have links provided in the webinar to be able to prepare them. Of course, if you don't have a food processor, it can be done in batches using a mortar and pestle. But save time if you need to, use fresh garlic. If you're able to, it'll be delicious. And pesto is, of course, another favorite for pastas, for sandwiches, for salad dressings, however you like to use it. We've had tons of basil this year, so just bringing in the basil, squirting some lemon juice and some toasted pecans or pine nuts or walnuts, whatever you like, can blend it right up to make a pesto, and you can refrigerate a couple of batches to use right away, or you can put some in the freezer. And the nice thing about freezing these small containers is, like Jasmine said, don't fill them all the way up to the top, but when you're freezing, you don't have to use a completely sterile technique. It's okay just to freeze it and use it, I would say, within 6 months or so. So for the ones you do put in the freezer, put a label and a date on it so you know when you made it.
You had a question that came up for you. What do you add to the garlic, if anything?
For the garlic, I add olive oil and salt. The olive oil just helps to smooth it out and make it into a paste. And then the salt helps to preserve it. And it also helps to just give it some flavor. Since I never put garlic into a sweet dish, it works well. Okay, and then the last paste that I was going to talk about is a pepper paste, which can be made with any kinds of peppers that you like, spicy to mild, somewhere in between. I find it lends itself really well to making any Mexican foods or Thai foods, Thai soups, stir fries, Chinese stir fries. So I didn't have, what I had on hand was jalapenos, so I made a slightly different paste than what's in the link that you have, but any peppers can be roasted in the oven and then blended up either by the mortar and pestle or by the food processor. And then to season those peppers, add some of your garlic paste or just fresh garlic and salt. And that's about it. You know, it also keeps really well in the freezer, and then you can just take it out and it makes it easy for your next recipe. If you don't have glass jars, it's also easy to use ice cube trays, and that might be preferable if you live in a smaller home. We have 5 people in our home, so we go through a decent amount of food, but if you just need smaller portions, then ice cube trays are a great way of freezing as well. Just put the tray in the freezer, and when it's frozen a few hours later, just pop out the cubes and put it into a plastic bag so that they get stored separately, like the fruits and vegetables that Jasmine showed us. All right. So next, we also make a lot of broth in our house. And since I've cracked so many jars, my husband and I came up with a way to make the broth into very usable, freezable portions, just using what you have. So these recycled containers. So, you know, I say recycled, but what I meant is upcycled containers. I loved the presentation that Jasmine showed us of her vegetables, because I've
got a question.
I would pretty much use the same vegetables, and I do it just like she does. But another option is to put all those vegetables into a tray and roast them in the oven first, and adding things like tomato and mushroom just adds so much umami and great flavor to the broth. I've linked a recipe for corn broth, because this season we've had so much great corn and I never want to throw the cob away. And I found a recipe for corn broth along with onions, carrots, any other veggie scraps that you have. And then what I'll show you is that you could pour the corn broth, you know, keep some to use right away, but if you've made a big enough batch that you want to freeze, you would just pour it into these containers. And this is just water, for an example. Put them in the freezer. When the broth is frozen, take it out, put it in a warm bath here to pop out the broth, and then for them, they make these puffs that you can fit about 6 of them in this freezer Ziploc bag. You know, Naomi made a joke about not cooking them for a whole week at a time, but this happens to be bone broth that my husband made, and to make true nutrient-dense bone broth, you really do have to cook it for a few days. So this has been cooked for quite a while, and then, you know, since they're in these pucks, it's really easy to just defrost them in any size pot that you use, and then he uses it to make different Asian soups. But we can of course use broth in anything that we're making. Okay, so that's the process for bone broth. And then the last thing I'll talk about is making one of our favorite summertime dishes, ratatouille. In our garden, we just have such an abundance of zucchini and eggplant and tomatoes this year. So I've been able to make everything really fresh. This jar over here is tomatoes mixed with all the garden herbs. Any herbs that you like are welcome. And I roasted them in an aluminum tray, and then I poured it in here. You know, I really like breaking up the work, and sometimes roasting vegetables allows me to do that. You know, you could just do the step of roasting them and then put them away and then cook the rest of your food later. So I've got those tomatoes here in this pot over here, and they've been simmering during the course of the webinar. I added a little bit of tomato paste because that helps thicken it a little bit. And in the recipe that I gave you for the ratatouille, it asks you to roast the vegetables first. So this is roasted zucchini that we'll just put in. And, you know, the zucchini kind of shriveled up really small because I got it ready a little too early, but I think it's going to cook down and really be delicious. And then this is the roasted eggplant. Eggplant is just a really delicious food, but it takes some effort sometimes to make it taste good because it's inherently bitter, but just adding salt to it and enough oil will do the trick. So
I'm wondering what temperature you were roasting those vegetables at, if you know.
These vegetables were roasted at, I believe, it's definitely in the recipe, but I believe it was 400 on convection mode. And so they definitely weren't this crispy when I first prepared them, but because I left them in the oven for a couple of hours, this has happened. But once they go into this tomato sauce, they're gonna cook up just fine. So not a lot of additional seasonings are required in ratatouille because the vegetables are so flavorful. So you can just use salt and pepper and, you know, if you like any other favorite seasonings. But this cooks up really nice. And you can eat it immediately. You can save it in the freezer, and it reheats really well. You can eat it with pasta. You can serve it on toast. You can do whatever you want with it. And you know, of course, I did have fresh tomatoes for this batch, but I've often done zucchini with just jarred sauce. So it's always okay to take shortcuts and make life easier for you. I think that's it.
Connie had a question about whether you could use any peppers in your pepper
Yes,
paste.
yeah, absolutely. So peppers can go in the ratatouille recipe, and in the pepper paste, you know, last summer I had a farm share from a CSA in our town, and I had all different varieties of peppers, and so it was just really delicious using the varieties that they gave me, and I don't even know the names of all those varieties, but you can use any kind that you want. You can't always predict the final spice level. You can always make the spice level less by removing the seeds.
Great, thank you.
Right. That's it.
Thanks, Jenny. I did want to mention, so Jenny referenced the recipes that we're sharing and all of the techniques and recipes we're sharing right now. We are going to have a PDF doc with links and recipes that will be posted on our website. So on SRL Longmont, .org on the Zero Waste page is where this webinar will be up permanently after the recording. So if you want to check out any of the recipes and try them, they will be there within like the next day when we post it. So also I want to mention, I love all of the freezing in like the different size containers for different recipes, and knowing like ahead of time what you might use a certain size for stock versus for those pastes in the ice cube trays. And I freeze in ice cube trays when I juice like lots of lemons or limes, because ice cube trays usually give you about a tablespoon. And so if like a recipe calls for a tablespoon of lemon juice or lime juice, I just have a whole sack of frozen ice cubes that I had done once I got like a sack and juiced and juiced and juiced. So I think it's really smart. I love using the pre-portioned frozen stuff. Makes it easy in the long run. We also are taking questions and answers live. So if we get them in time, we will try to answer them live or type an answer. We had a couple questions that I'm just going to quickly mention in case someone doesn't have access to the chat later on. What kinds of pots and pans are best to minimize waste as you have to replace them? Are they recyclable? So for that one, stainless steel and metal is going to be your best bet for longevity and also being able to recycle it at the end of the line. And then, yeah, those tempered glass dishes, any sort of glass dishes, I think that glass and metal is the way you want to go. If you've got the coating, the Teflon coating, I don't believe that those can be recycled. And then finding bulk products right now. I used to get my stuff at Sprouts, but now they closed the bulk section. So if you live in Longmont, there's Simply Bulk Market, who was a guest on our last webinar, and they have been open all summer, all fall. They are a great bulk store. And so they have, I do most of my shopping there, and then the farmer's market, and you're able to get vegetables, fruits, and then all of your bulk needs at Simply Bulk Market. And I believe there's a similar store in Boulder. I don't have the name at the top of my head, but there is another bulk bring your own container store there as well. And then there's one other question just about if I don't have a bin for potatoes for keeping them separate, where should I store them so they don't go bad? Anywhere that's cool and dark. So the back of a cupboard, if you have a basement, you can store in the basement. Just keeping them separate from other vegetables that could get them to grow those eyes or sprouts early, if you can get them sequestered somewhere cool and dark. All right, so I think that's it for questions right now. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about canning. So canning is one of my favorite food preservation techniques. I do small batch canning. So small batch canning, you use a water bath for what I like to do, which means all I need is like a big stock pot to put the jars in. And I can use you can use water baths for pickles and fruit preserves. They need to have a certain level of acidity, and I find it more accessible than having a canner. So you can, there's also pressure canners, and if you want to can things that don't have a high enough level of acidity, then you would need a pressure canner to make it safe. So right now I'm going to talk about this because, it's, like I said, it's the most accessible. You can just have a stock pot and do it. Here are some of the tools that you will need. Wide mouth funnel. This is great. It fits right into the different sizes of jars and keeps the edges clean when you're pouring the different things in, the liquids. Of course, jars, some sort of mason jars with the lid and screw top. They come in tons of different sizes. And these three items came together in a little canning kit for me. Having a wide mouth funnel, having a jar gripper. So when you're putting things into or taking things out of the water bath, it holds on and gives you a nice grip. And then this is a little magnet. So this is when you're sterilizing the jars, to get the lids so they don't all get lost, you reach into the boiling water with this and you can fish them out with the magnet. So these are like really the only specialty tools that I need to do canning, and the big pot, and then the jars and the lids. So the process is you boil the glass jars first in water, make sure it's covering all the jars, and you boil it for about 10 minutes to sterilize. And then you turn off the heat and put in the lids and the rings and let those sit for a couple minutes too. You don't want those at too high of a boil because you don't want the rubberized ring to start to degrade. And so those all get sterilized that way, and then you take them out and let them sit and dry off a little bit on a clean towel on the counter. While that's sterilizing, you can put together your recipe. So you can do, like I said, pickling and jams and preserves this way. So cooking down the fruit. One thing I really like doing, well, first I'll talk about the processing time. So you fill them, use this, fill, put the top on, put the lid on, put them back in, and then you'd have processing time, it's called, when they're all sealed up and they're in the hot water boiling. Most processing time is like between 10 and 20 minutes. And we're at a high altitude here. So most recipes will give you a standard processing time. For every 1,000 feet of altitude, you have to add on 1 minute. So for Longmont, that's about 5 minutes for each recipe for processing time. So most jams and jellies and preserves will process 15 minutes up here. Pickles can be anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes, depending on the recipe. So always follow the recipe and always add 1 minute for every 1,000 feet above sea level you are. For pickles, you want to be sure to use a vinegar in the amount and the acidity that the recipe calls for. So if you're shopping at Simply Bulk Market, the bulk white vinegar there is 10% because it can also be used for cleaning purposes. So most pickling recipes call for like 5 to 7% acidity. So you can dilute a 10% vinegar 1-to-1 ratio to get that 5% for your recipe. So just make sure you're paying attention to, if you're going to swap out vinegars, if you're going to use white wine vinegar instead of red wine vinegar, just make sure you're using the same acidity, because that's what's going to make sure your recipe is going to preserve the food properly and be safe. So I did make some pickles this past week, and inside each jar of a pickle, I put in a grape leaf. And so a trick to try to keep the pickles crisp is adding a grape leaf to each jar and also trimming off the blossom end of the cucumber. And both of those things I've seen recommended in many pickling recipes to try to keep your dill pickles crisp if that's what you want. So grape leaf, 1 per jar. And then there's also, let's see if you can see in here, I was mentioning those dill heads. You can see that kind of flowery thing in here. It's the top of a dill. Before it's gone to seed, it'll be a little bit more green and bright. Let's see if that's on camera, like that. And so 1 of those per jar too. Now, I don't currently have dill growing in my yard or grapes. So I was able to get donations for this recipe thanks to my neighbors and using Nextdoor. So the Longmont Gardening Club is a great group on Nextdoor. And I put out a call for dill heads and for grape leaves. And thank you, Sean and Marilyn, for contributing and making my pickling process possible. There's a lot of great community networks you can use if you're trying to source little weird ingredients that someone might just have in your yard, you know. I don't know if you can buy grape leaves like this, probably for Dolmas, but you know, they're just growing in people's yards. So it's really great to be able to reach out to that network. So that was a little bit about the pickling. I also had some green beans that I pickled. In one of the jars I made spicy and put in some red pepper flakes, and one of them I just made regular pickle. But yeah, you don't have to just pickle cucumbers. You can do green beans. There's tons of different things you can pickle if you like different types of pickles. And you can also, you know, there's garlic that we've added into one of these, and you can add in a hot pepper. You can add in mustard seed. There's a lot that you can play around with to get different flavors for different types of vegetables. Just make sure you're following a recipe and using acidity levels that are recommended. So for jams and jellies, I really like using pectin. I use Pomona's Universal Pectin. So one thing that pectin allows you to do is it gets you a hard set gel without as much sugar or processing of the fruit. So older recipes that don't have added pectin in them will often have a lot of sugar, and also you're cooking the fruit for hours and hours to get that gel. But using a modern pectin combination, there's 2 packets that you mix. The one that you mix into citric water is calcium water, and then a pectin that you mix into the fruit, to the sugar, and then mix into the fruit. There's a little recipe booklet and it talks you through the process of using pectin. It's really easy. And what I love about Pomona Pectin is they not only give you how to use it, they give you a ton of recipes and gives you options for low sugar. It gives you options for honey or low sugar if you want that option, or regular sugar. Even the regular sugar recipes in here aren't as high sugar as some traditional jam and preserve making recipes that required a lot of cooking time. So I like that the fruit's a little fresher before you can it, and that you will still get that gel. And they also give you recommendations. So if you want to develop your own recipe, if you've done a bunch of these recipes and you feel confident, it gives you some advice on how to do that and how to tweak them. They also have a website, Pomona Pectin website, that has a ton more recipes. So really recommend them if you're going to try it. And then small batch jams you can make as gifts. You can do in normal jams that are size or smaller. These ones are from, my mom actually sent them to me this year, and I'm saving them for the middle of winter when I need a taste of summer. But yeah, you can add little labels. I think if you're giving them as gifts, definitely add labels so they know when they were made. That's helpful. And with my pickles, you know, you should label when they're done, but they take about 1 to 2 months to really cure into the flavor you want. So if you're doing pickling this month, it'll be ready by Thanksgiving. You could have some Thanksgiving pickles. You could probably open them in a month or so if you wanted to taste, but if you really want a good fermenty brine flavor, I think from now to Thanksgiving is a pretty good timeline for that. And I know I'm going to eat all of these by the end of the year, so I'm not going to put fancy labels on mine. But the nice thing about canning and doing this sort of stuff, if you do it, once you buy the stuff, you've got the jars, they can be re-sanitized, reused. The rings can be reused. The only thing that really shouldn't be reused, these lids, the rubberized stuff will degrade, and then you won't get a seal. To check your seals, you kind of push down into the center. And if you don't hear a pop noise, if it's not going, then it's sealed properly, and then you know that the canning process worked, and you don't have a gap in your vacuum. So they do sell the lids separately, so you can just keep resupplying and resupplying. So yeah, most of my jam and jelly recipes I get from Pomona Pectin. I've really liked their grape jelly, and so I am going to recommend that for any grape growers in Longmont. I also really like their applesauce recipe, which I'm going to be making soon for Longmont Food Rescue. We're going to be making a bunch of applesauce this fall as a fundraiser, so I'm looking forward to doing that in the next couple of weeks. And I think that for other types of recipes, there's another great site called Pick Your Own, and I go to that one a lot as well. So Pick Your Own has all sorts of preserving techniques. It's got canning, it's got drying and freezing. It's got all sorts of things, but mostly I go to it for canning recipes, and that's where I got the recipe for the green beans that I tried. So this is my first time trying it, but I trust Pick Your Own, and they always have good recipes. So we'll link to a few of those in that document that I mentioned. And then just a note about acidity in canning. So tomatoes, figs, white nectarines, and peaches, they're all acidic, but they're borderline on the acidity level. They're considered low acid fruits. So that's what I was saying with the tomatoes. If you're putting them in oil, you dip them in the vinegar first, you want to raise the acidity level. So you can use water bath techniques for canning tomatoes, figs, white nectarines and peaches, papayas, bananas. Those are all considered low acid. But you have to add lemon juice to the recipe to raise the acidity for water bath canning. So find a recipe you trust, go to Pomona Pectin, go to Pick Your Own. I also highly recommend this book. This is The Big Book of Preserving the Harvest. And it also has a lot of techniques. It's got canning and freezing and drying, all of the stuff that we've talked about today, as well as like a bunch of recipes. And it also has some nice charts that break down different types of vegetables and different times, techniques, it's really accessible if you're just starting out. So if you want a good recipe book to learn about, if you want to go deeper into anything we talk about today, I recommend this one. And yeah, same with that Pick Your Own website. It's got a lot. What I really love about that website is it breaks down recipes with photos. So it'll show you the different steps of the process, and it shows you the whole process of like doing the sanitizing first. And I think that if you're a little nervous about canning, if it's your first time, that site, the Pick Your Own, really takes you through in a way that feels safe and manageable. And like doing small batch stuff, you can do, you know, hour and a half. You're cooking up the fruit or the brine while your jars are sanitizing. You're chopping up the vegetables, packing them in, pouring in the brine, process for 20 minutes maybe at the most, and then you're done. It doesn't have to be this whole day operation that some people think of canning as being. So that's why I like, you know, going to the farmer's market, or if you grow your own, and just getting, you know, an amount that you think you could use and can, and try it out. It's, once you get into it, it's really fun, and like I said, a lot more accessible than I think people might initially think if you haven't tried it before. And if you ever have a can that you push on it and it doesn't seal, you could either put it straight in the fridge and use it in the next week or so, or you can try reprocessing it. You can, you know, you check them right after you take them out and cool them to see if they're, you know, as they cool, they'll start to settle. So when it's totally cool, if it hasn't popped, you can get a fresh lid, get a fresh top, reprocess it, and see if it seals. So there are things you can do if you think your stuff didn't seal correctly. But if you've got one jar, I'll just put it in the fridge. You know, I usually don't. You know, most of mine, all of mine popped this time, so that's exciting. You know, and yeah, they're usually, the recipes will tell you how long they're shelf stable for, but honestly, I will eat them over a couple months or the winter. They don't last more than a year for me. So we'll have some recipes for that in the document as well. And speaking of recipes, we thought, oh, I think I have a question. Let me make sure I didn't miss it. Oh, how long did it take for you to get canning as part of your routine lifestyle? So I started canning when I was in Los Angeles and doing that food exchange. You know, anyone who had excess food would bring it and we'd swap it. And so you didn't have a tree full of lemons or a tree full of kumquats. There's a lot of, you know, fruit trees in Southern California. And so seeing how much fruit people just grew in their backyards without trying and how much went to waste, it was when I was getting into food waste and rescue advocacy. And so I was like, I need to learn how to make use of this. I need to learn how to can it. And so I just kind of self-taught. I found the pomona pectin, I found the websites, I used Pick Your Own, and I found it just really took me through the process. So I would say after like a couple attempts that were successful, I started to gain confidence, but it's been part of my routine, I would say, almost a decade now. And there's a lot of opportunity to be doing jellies and preserves and marmalades and stuff in California. But here you've got grapes. We can make awesome grape jelly. Apples, can make applesauce. There's peaches in the farmer's market this past month, can make peach jams and peach preserves. Nectarines right now, I think, are still around. So there's still lots of fruit to be preserved if you like making jams and jellies, and then it's perfect pickling time. There's pickling cucumbers in the farmers markets right now. So one thing I haven't tried canning yet is tomatoes because of the acidity thing. So I personally just haven't tried it, but I've got the oil pack. That one felt like, okay, I can do the oil pack. But I think you just need to add either like lemon juice or citric acid. The recipes will tell you how much to make sure that the tomatoes are safe. And then you can do the water bath canning. Let me see, do I have another question? Will we be talking about composting in this session? We will not. We talked about composting a bit in our first one when we were talking about food waste. So that had a big composting. So if you go back to our first webinar of the summer, you'll be able to learn more about composting. Can you freeze cherry tomatoes? Yeah, they got full of water. So if you freeze them as is, they will like puff up and explode a little. You can do a blanch. Tomatoes or anything's fine frozen pretty much. So you don't have to worry about the acidity stuff. That's just for canning. One thing that you can do though is you can roast them with a little olive oil and get them to blister and stuff, and then pack them in those jars like Jasmine was doing. Leave that little head space still, even when you're freezing, so that they will expand a little. You don't want to crack those jars. But that's a really nice way of freezing cherry tomatoes too, is just to do a little blister on them with some some oil, and then you can add them to recipes during the winter and you'll get that taste of summer. Is apple cider vinegar and regular white vinegar interchangeable? Again, you want to check that acidity percentage. So each vinegar on its packaging, when you buy it, will say a percentage. And so just make sure whatever you're exchanging has the same percentage for the recipe. It'll just have a different flavor. So apple cider vinegar, if you have it at 5% or 5 to 7, whatever is recommended for your pickling recipe, and want to use that instead of white vinegar for pickling, you can. It might impart a different flavor. You can play with that. I know some people like adding flavored vinegars or red wines and trying that, as long as it's at the same acidity percentage. All right, I think that's all of our questions for now. So we were getting a little bit into recipes, and we thought it would be nice to end the webinar by sharing some quick and easy recipes for at-home lunches, since a lot of us are at home more than usual lately, and many of us at home with kids from schools as well. So as I said before, all the recipes and links we'll share today are going to be in a PDF document that will be hosted on the SRL website in the Zero Waste page. And Jenny, would you like to go first?
Hi there. All right. So I'm going to begin with talking about delicious sandwiches. So, you know, we're all used to grilled cheese and peanut butter and jelly or ham and cheese, but there is a lot more to sandwich making. So I've pulled out a very inexpensive sandwich maker. And you may or may not have one. I see lots of them in the thrift stores, or, you know, and maybe you have one that you haven't used in a while. You can use it. You can use any frying pan that you've got, but I think grilled sandwiches taste great with fall coming, or just any time of year. They're a nice lunch. And so what should we put in our grilled sandwich? And first of all, the bread can be regular bread, it can be a pita, it can be a tortilla, anything you want. So start with a bread, and then here's a plate of some things that we could add. So, you know, reducing meats is one of my favorite things to do. You know, we still eat meat, but let's use less of it. So here's some ingredients that can make a sandwich really tasty. Hummus. Mine is homemade, but store-bought, homemade, anything will work. And here are some fresh sliced tomatoes, fresh sliced cucumbers, any kind of cheese that you have, or you could skip the cheese because you could use lots of other yummy things, like this happens to be an Indian eggplant tomato dish. So this is my leftover, but whatever you've got for leftovers, any roasted vegetables, anything goes, you know. And then if you have a sauce and you made pesto, the pesto can go in too. So you can use 2 of these ingredients, or you can use 5 of them, but it'll make a delicious sandwich. So next is something that's new to me and might be new to you, but it's as easy as 1, 2, and 3. So these are going to be lentil pancakes, and you start with 1 cup of red lentils. And so they're really small, fine lentils. And so we're going to put them into a container. And I said 1, 2, 3. So it's 1 cup of lentils, and it's going to be 2 cups of water. And we're going to let it soak for 3 hours. So that's the 1, 2, 3. And after 3 hours of soaking, we are going to blend them. So you do need a good blender or food processor to grind it down. And then it's going to make essentially like a really thin and creamy pancake mix that you'll just pour onto a hot griddle and make pancakes. And surprisingly, these red lentil pancakes, they can be made sweet, like with peanut butter and jelly, or cream cheese and nuts, or, you know, whatever you can think of. Or it can be made savory with cucumber and sour cream or any fillings that you have. So red lentil pancakes, 1, 2, 3. And again, another option for lunch as leftovers. Take your leftover chili, and I've just got a small bowl left because my daughter came and ate it during the webinar. But this is leftover chili, and you can just make nachos with either prepared ready-made chips, or you can pan fry or bake tortilla chips or pita chips. Like pita is a really delicious way to make nachos, and you can use chili, you can use any leftover beans or meats, you can use the hummus again, any cheeses, sour creams, whatever you like to make nachos. And this next thing reminds me to take you back to the Instant Pot. This is because at the Instant Pot we have a recipe for macaroni and cheese. And I don't have that cooking right now, but it'll be in the links. But oh gosh, I didn't know it could be so easy to make creamy mac and cheese. And I just have to say, the one warning point is that, let me get the lid, is when you release the steam, because you don't want the pasta to overcook, when you release the steam from the Instant Pot, there's going to be a lot of splatter over here. And because of that splatter, okay, give me a second. I think it's useful to just put this little red rag on there to catch the splatter, so you know nobody gets burned from the hot splatter of the hot water from the pasta cooking. So check that out if you own an Instant Pot, but if you don't, you know, anyone can make mac and cheese. It's easy. And then I'll just end with my plug for cooking and composting. You know, when I first started cooking, I was a little bit of a perfectionist about it and thought, oh, well, if it's, who's going to like it? And actually, like anything else, the more you do, the better you get. But guess what? If it doesn't turn out good or your food goes bad, just compost it. Put it in the compost and it will grow into something beautiful again, a flower, new food. But it's easy. There are no mistakes in the kitchen. Everything's workable. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jenny. So I have a quick question to answer. Jeremy asked, is it safe to place the jars in the water bath without a rack at the bottom of the pot? And I actually had my rack out and forgot to show it. So it's very good that you just showed the Instant Pot, because Jenny, this comes from my Instant Pot, which I got in the last year. So I did actually try this and put it in the bottom of my pot this time when I did the canning, and it props them up and it keeps it from getting too hot in the bottom. That being said, for 10 years, I used this pot without a rack in it and had no problems. The reason why most sites and recipes recommend you put some sort of a rack like this in the bottom is because there's a risk of the glass shattering or exploding. That is everything that I've seen as a reason why you would do that. I've never had it happen, so I don't know what circumstances they would shatter under. Maybe if you have a very thick bottom pot that's retaining a lot of heat. This is a fairly thin bottom pot, so it doesn't build up as much heat underneath. But if you have an Instant Pot, it'll come with this. That's really nice, and you can use it for canning. So I hope that answers your question. Technically, for safety's reason, you're supposed to do that. I've not had problems though in the past. And Jasmine, we're ready for your recipes.
All right. I know we're getting a little low on time, but I wanted to share just a few of my favorite recipes, especially because right now I am drowning in these guys. We planted a garden for the first time this year, my husband and I, and we just have a ton of zucchini and squash. That's like the only thing we're getting. So I found a recipe for a really good zucchini soup, which is a creamy soup. which is another one that's really, really good for freezing. So just like Jenny's recipes and Naomi's recipes, these will be shared. But basically all you do for the zucchini soup recipe is super simple. You, if you have a fresh zucchini like this, you can just chop it up into chunks, like couple-inch chunks, throw them into a pot, dice up an onion or even just large chunks of onion straight into the pot with some garlic. Toast that up for a little bit, just a few minutes, saute it on the stove, and then pour in some of that delicious broth that you're all going to make until you get kind of to the level of the vegetables. So you don't want to fully like submerge them, but just get them up to that level. Boil all of it for like 20 minutes or so. And then my favorite tool that I showed you earlier, one of them is the Immersion Blender. You go in when everything's soft and you just blitz everything up until it's nice and creamy and smooth. With this recipe, you can add all kinds of different things. If you want to mix up the flavor, you can put in red peppers. I put in chili flakes, or red chili flakes. You could put in different spices and things like that. And you can also make it extra creamy and by adding yogurt or sour cream, just a tablespoon or so, and then blitzing that in with the rest of it. It freezes really, really well. I have some here that I have frozen. Doesn't look super appealing like this, but it is really, really good. And I put a little bit of jalapeno in there too. I just like to have that with a little bit of crunch. You can put some pumpkin seeds on top or get a slice of bread out of the freezer, toast it up, dip your bread into your soup, and it's a great lunchtime thing or dinner time thing. It's really, really good, especially as we go into winter. I've also heard you can grate zucchini. I haven't tried it yet myself. This is the first year that we've gotten an abundance like this, but you can, I believe, grate it and freeze it. And I plan to try that with this soup recipe too this winter. Another one, again, like we talked about, we're all kind of at home and not doing a whole lot. And one of my favorite things, and I think for kids too, is to have a crunchy snack in the afternoon. I'm just a big fan of crunchy snacks. So that can be carrots, it can be whatever. But one thing that I like to make are roasted chickpeas. These actually aren't roasted. These are just plain old chickpeas. But basically you take your chickpeas, you can take about 1.5 cups. You can put about a tablespoon of oil on them, get them really dry first. Make sure the oil coats the beans. And then you can also sprinkle on some of your favorite herbs and spices. You can get really creative. I've never tried honey roasted chickpeas, so I like to do like garlic powder or cumin, or you can even do like onion powder and things like that for a real good savory flavor. Stick them in the oven at 350 for, what did I say? I think it's like 20 minutes. It's really not very long. No, it's 45. It's longer than I thought. But when they're done, they're really, really good to eat fresh. You can put them in an airtight container and they'll keep for a while. So you have a really easy go-to crunchy snack that you can eat by itself, sprinkle it on a salad, whatever works for you. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was banana ice cream. So you saw my bananas earlier and they're pretty ripe. And I, for a long, long time, would always just freeze them whole and then thaw them out and make banana bread. But recently I discovered making banana ice cream, which is one of my new favorite things and approved by super sweet tooth husband. So it's a good one. Basically, you freeze the bananas in those little slices like I showed earlier. When they're fully frozen, you can throw them into a food processor, or you can, I haven't tried it in a normal blender, but I've heard that it can work. It just takes a little longer. You blitz them up in the food processor for quite a while. They get really crumbly. They almost look like a grain after a while. And then all of a sudden, bam, they turn creamy. And it's really, really delicious. You can have it just like that. Or if you want to mix it up and do different flavors, you can add little chocolate chips. You can add peanut butter powder. You could add honey if you really want to sweeten it up, walnuts, cinnamon, all kinds of things. So that's a really good one, a really great vegan recipe, and really nice if you don't want to turn your oven on to make banana bread, but you have a lot of ripe bananas. So my favorite thing about all of these is that you can do whatever size portions you want. You can freeze individual size portions. You can have a huge batch for family coming over, whatever you want to do, but they're all great. And these recipes will be shared on the PDF.
Awesome. Thank you, Jasmine. I am so excited to try the banana ice cream. That sounds Fabulous. So I know we're wrapping up here, so I'm just going to quickly show you what I've made, and then like Jasmine said, we'll have all the recipes for you online afterwards. Kale chips, great fast snack, healthy. The trick to making good kale chips is to cook at a lower temp, so 300 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 to 25 minutes, and you rotate the sheet midway through, and just keep an eye on them for the last 5 to 10 minutes. Make sure they don't burn, but they're really tasty. If you can have them last long enough, they can get stored, but I prefer to just eat them the day of. If you get sick of making tons of zucchini bread, you can try Zucchini Cobbler. So that recipe will also be linked in the document. Basically, when you cook zucchini with sugar and lemon juice, it tastes like apples or pears. And so that's a really fun way. I brought it to potlucks before, and no one has been able to figure out what the fruit is. They all think it's apples. So I'm like, no, it's a surprise, it's zucchini. So that's a really fun way to use up your extra zucchini if you've got the massive ones like Jasmine does right now. And then I also recommend making egg bakes. So at the beginning of the week, Sunday or Monday morning, if you've got time, you can make big portions. Either you can make them in a 9 by 13 glass baking dish. You can make it in a skillet, in a cast iron skillet, or in muffin tins. And so these are all individual portion muffin tin egg bakes. And I really like doing it because it's very flexible. Whatever vegetables you have in your kitchen, you can chop up, dice up, pre-saute if they need it. These ones have some potatoes in them, so I boil the potatoes first before making it. But you know, it's a frittata, but it's in a little egg cup. And then you have individual portions to last throughout the week. And if you use a dozen eggs and a tray of muffin tins, that's 1 egg per tin. Perfect breakfasts or snacks, and kids can also take them, heat them up in the microwave for 10 to 15 seconds, and they're done, and you don't have to worry about breakfast. And then another thing you can also do in muffin tins, I had a single hamburger bun left with nothing to put in it, and so 1 hamburger bun turned into 5 mini bread puddings. This is just you know, sugar, eggs and milk, and a little butter, and then you can add cinnamon, you can add flavorings, you can make a syrup to put on later. But yeah, one hamburger bun turned into 5 single portion size bread puddings. So I like doing that in muffin tins as well. All right, and let's see, I've got a little bit of slideshow at the very end. We've got a couple images. This is just the other ways you can make the egg bakes. This is the skillet in the oven, cast iron. That one uses 8 eggs, so then it's like one slice is an egg, and then the little muffin trays. This is, just a process picture of the drying tomatoes with the tin foil layered on top is the grate, and on top of that is the cheesecloth, and also the herbs in the little jars. The different types of vegetables that you can regrow. This is just kind of a little recap. On the right are the potato plants and the potatoes. I was able to grow from 2 potatoes this spring, turned into, so far, more than a dozen, and I've got more to harvest later. But you can see the beets and the lettuce and all other sorts of things you can grow from old scraps. Here are some process pictures of Jenny's garlic paste being made and canned, and the pesto being made and canned. So yum. And then the corn, the corn stalk, the easy to compost container with a little folded newspaper there, grated zucchini, and all of the fixings that we saw for the panini press sandwiches. So just to get an idea of what it all looks like in process. And then this is just kind of an ending slide to show what we went over, wrap up on these ideas. So this will all be hosted online later. The webinar will be up on our YouTube and on our Facebook. So if you ever want a quick reference for some ideas, you can just go to this ending, the slide, and check it out. The tools that we talked about, what you might want to stock up on if you've not tried reusable parchment and beeswax before, or cheesecloth, ways to keep your herbs fresh, ways to regrow types of vegetables you might want to regrow, how to freeze, how to soup, how to can, all of those things. It's just a little like cheat sheet if you want to be reminded of all of the wonderful presentations and information that was shared today. And then, as I mentioned earlier, all the recipes and links will be in that PDF document, which will be hosted on the SRL website. It'll be on the Zero Waste page, which is where it says to view that webinar in its entirety. So it'll be there with the webinar. It'll also be on our YouTube. And if you would like to get involved with, Sustainable Resilient Longmont and the Zero Waste Committee, there will be links in the Zoom chat and in that document. Please sign up for a monthly newsletter to stay up to date on all of our events. And we are a community-run nonprofit. We rely on donations and grants. So if you're able to donate, we deeply appreciate your support. We're also running our membership drive right now, so you can pledge for a member reward like our 2020 SRL t-shirt right now too. And a huge thank you to everyone who joined us for this webinar. And thank you to Jenny and Jasmine for all of the tips, tricks, techniques, and recipes that you shared with us today. I hope all of you out there have fun cooking and preserving this fall.